Disclaimer: this video is a historical documentary created for educational purposes. All scenes are artistic reenactments based on documented events. No real violence is shown or promoted. On the cold, foggy morning of January 21st, 1793, a hush fell over a crowd of 20,000 in Paris as a man, once known as King Louis XVI, climbed the steps of a wooden scaffold. He had one final message for his people, a message he believed could change history. But what really happened in those last moments before the blade fell? What were the true last words of the man whose death ended 1,000 years of monarchy in France? This is a minute-by-minute account of his final hour, revealing his surprising dignity, his final plea, and the chaotic, bloody scene that followed. So, how did a king, once believed to be chosen by God, end up a condemned man named Citizen Louis Capet? For years, France had been teetering on the brink of collapse. Decades of disastrous wars, financial mismanagement, and crippling famines had left the common people starving, while the aristocracy enjoyed unimaginable luxury. Louis XVI, a man most historians agree was well-intentioned but tragically indecisive, had tried to fix things. But every attempt at reform was shot down by those with vested interests. When the French Revolution finally erupted, it wasn't just a political movement. It was a violent explosion of centuries of pent-up rage. In 1791, the king made a fatal mistake. He tried to flee Paris for the Austrian Netherlands, hoping to rally foreign support to crush the revolution. He was caught in Varennes and dragged back to Paris, no longer a king in his people's eyes, but a traitor. His fate was sealed in November 1792 when a secret iron chest, the Armoire de Fer, was found in his palace. Inside were hundreds of documents, many in his own handwriting, that proved his secret dealings and counter-revolutionary plots. He was put on trial by the new National Convention. The verdict was a foregone conclusion, guilty of high treason, in a unanimous vote where not a single deputy voted not guilty. The sentence, however, was a much closer call. After a marathon session lasting nearly 24 hours, the death penalty passed by a narrow majority. His own cousin, Philippe Égalité, the Duke of Orléans, cast a vote for his execution, an act that would forever stain his name. And so, stripped of all titles, he was just Citizen Louis Capet, and the final hour of his life was about to begin. The clock didn't start at 9 a.m., but hours earlier, at 5 a.m., inside the grim temple prison. Awakened in the cold and dark, Louis dressed not in royal robes, but in a simple white vest, gray breeches, and a brown coat. He heard Mass and received the last rites from his chosen confessor, an Irish-born priest named Henry Essex Edgeworth de Fermont, who had bravely agreed to stay with him to the very end. The night before, Louis had endured the most agonizing moment of his life, saying goodbye to his family. His wife, Marie Antoinette, his sister, Elizabeth, and his two young children, Marie-Thérèse and Louis-Charles, were brought to his room. For 2 hours, the room echoed with heartbreaking sobs as they clung to one another. He urged his son never to seek revenge for his death. He promised he would see them all one last time in the morning, a promise he knew he couldn't keep. On the advice of Abbé Edgeworth, he decided to spare them and himself the pain of a second farewell. As 9 a.m. arrived, the heavy doors of the temple opened. Louis was escorted not on a royal horse, but in the mayor's humble carriage. The journey to the Place de la Révolution was deliberately long, a slow procession through the heart of his former capital. The city was a fortress. The streets were lined 4 deep with National Guardsmen, bayonets fixed, their faces grim. The usual noise of Paris was gone, replaced by a profound, eerie silence. The only sounds were the rumble of the carriage wheels and the steady, rhythmic beat of drums. Inside the carriage, Louis was astonishingly calm. He spoke very little, choosing instead to read psalms from a book provided by Abbé Edgeworth. The priest was terrified, convinced the mob would tear him apart the moment it was over. But the king's composure seemed unshakable. They passed through streets where, just a few years before, crowds would have cheered his name. Now there were no cheers, no jeers, just an ocean of silent, armed citizens. As they neared the scaffold, Louis leaned over to his confessor and whispered, "We have arrived, if I mistake not." At 10:22 a.m., the carriage stopped in the center of the Place de la Révolution, today's Place de la Concorde. There, in the middle of a vast empty square, surrounded by cannons and a crowd of around 20,000, stood the guillotine. 3 executioners, led by the chief, Charles-Henri Sanson, opened the carriage door. Sanson was no royalist, but the duty of executing the king, a man he had once served, filled him with dread. As Louis stepped out, he recoiled when guards surrounded him and tried to remove his coat. "You may do as you are ordered," he said with a flash of his old authority, "but you shall never bind me." He took off his own coat and untied his collar. But when the executioners moved to bind his hands, he resisted again. "What are you attempting?" he demanded. "To bind you," they replied. A tense standoff followed. It was Abbé Edgeworth who broke the impasse, whispering that this final humiliation was a sacrifice, linking his suffering to that of Jesus Christ. At this, Louis relented. "So be it then, that too, my God," he sighed and offered his hands. With his hands bound and his hair cut, he began climbing the steep steps of the scaffold. He leaned on his confessor's arm, but at the top, he suddenly let go and strode firmly across the platform. He faced the crowd and, with a powerful look, silenced the 15 or 20 drummers positioned in front of him. In a voice so loud it was said to have carried across the square, he declared, "I die innocent of all the crimes laid to my charge. I pardon those who have caused my death, and I pray to God that the blood you are about to shed may never be visited upon France." He tried to say more, but a general on horseback, Antoine-Joseph Santerre, roared for the drums to beat. The thunderous roll drowned out the king's voice, a deliberate act to stop any last-minute appeal to the crowd. The moment was lost. The executioners seized him, strapping him to the plank. As they positioned his neck, he spoke his final words, this time to them. "Gentlemen, I am innocent of everything of which I am accused. I wish that my blood may be able to cement the happiness of the French." Then the blade fell. In a flash, it was over. One of the guards grabbed the severed head from the basket and held it up for the massive crowd to see. Blood streamed down the wooden planks. For a moment, an awful silence hung over the square. Then a few cries of "Vive la République!" "Long live the Republic!" broke the stillness, multiplying until the cheer echoed across the square. Eyewitness accounts describe a grim scene, with people surging forward to dip handkerchiefs and scraps of paper in the king's blood as macabre souvenirs. His body was placed in a simple coffin and taken to the Madeleine Cemetery, where it was buried in an unmarked grave. The execution was a point of no return for the French Revolution. It was a symbolic act meant to destroy the idea of monarchy itself. While some celebrated, others were horrified. The act sent shockwaves across the globe, terrifying Europe's other monarchies and inspiring revolutionaries. Ultimately, Louis's prayer for France went unanswered. His death did not lead to happiness. Instead, it was a catalyst for the most violent and radical phase of the revolution, the Reign of Terror, which would officially begin that September. The guillotine would soon be working overtime. Less than 9 months later, his wife, Marie Antoinette, would meet the same fate on the very same scaffold. Louis XVI faced his end not as a tyrant, but as a devout man whose courage surprised everyone, even his executioner. His final words weren't a plea for his life, but a prayer for his country, a country that, in its revolutionary fury, refused to listen. The execution was meant to be an ending, but it opened a new, blood-soaked chapter in history, one whose consequences are still debated today. While he was the last king of France's Ancien Régime, the monarchy itself would be restored years later, though it would never be the same. What do you think? Was the execution of Louis XVI a necessary act of justice or a tragic mistake? Let us know in the comments, and be sure to watch our next video, where we explore the final, harrowing days of his wife, Marie Antoinette.